Welcome back to the channel. You're riding with me in the Murci, which, as all of you know, is one of my favorite two cars. It's either this or my SV. But since we're in the Murci today, the Murci is my favorite. Let's talk about the dyno. I'm sure that's what most of you came to see. The Murci on the dyno. Well, inherently, first off, there's some major problems with that. It all comes back to all-wheel drive. That's what the Murci is, and my dyno is a two-wheel drive dyno. But luckily for us, quite a while ago actually, this car was converted to rear-wheel drive. I just didn't have a time to do a video on it, so it seems fitting to tie it in with that. Now, if you're going to analyze whether or not to do it, there's a million different opinions out there, tons of videos. All I'll say is this, from my experience, it's hands down the way to go. Mostly because it can be turned back. So many options out there that you do a modification, can't go back, unhappy. That's not the case with this. But for me, actually, in the back roads here, it's just a lot of fun. You kind of have to weigh fun versus ultimate performance of any car. If it has all-wheel drive capability, I believe it's going to be faster. So if you want to track it, or I don't know, run in the back roads with your friends that are crazy like JC, probably want to have the all-wheel drive. But in my particular case, I'll just take the SV. Now, as far as doing the job, a lot of you probably saw me do the job on the G. The job itself is not too bad. You know, it's fairly straightforward. And the greatest part is, if you do it yourself, turn it back yourself whenever you want. But there's one major difference between the Murci and the G. The cool thing about the G is, you can unbolt the drive shaft, and then you can try it out and see if you like it. So it's kind of like not being in a full commitment. I don't know, maybe just like dating a lot. But with the Murci, the difficult part is that the front drive shaft, or in Lambo terms, front propeller shaft, is actually splined. So to make clearance to pull it down, you have to move the front differential forward. Now you're into it so deep at that point, I mean, it's probably worth just doing it. So you move the front differential forward, you get clearance, you pull out the front propeller shaft, which actually has a torque tube. That torque tube actually is used to stabilize the transmission as well. So if you do all that work and you don't put a kit on it, there's no support for the transmission. It's kind of just hanging off the engine. Not the greatest thing. If you wanted to just try it and not go crazy, okay, I'm with you. But other than that, I would definitely get a support on that thing. There are different kits available. From everything I've seen, I like the Reid Performance kit. The parts are amazing. You can take a look and see the craftsmanship, CNC transmission mount. The mount itself uses the factory bolt holes, which of course is a major plus for me. And then of course, once you remove the axles, last part of the component, you got to use stub axles. Now, of course, everyone who knows me knows my favorite two materials in life are carbon fiber and tie. Well, lo and behold, the Reid Performance stub axles are tie. And not only that, the nuts are even tie. And that is definitely top tier. So all that together, what I can say is, well worth it. Now we can take a look at some of the things that I went through when I was working on it. Now, as far as the job itself, bottom line is you got to get that front differential out like we talked about, release it from the torque tube and its mounts, then pull the torque tube and the front propeller shaft out, get out also the axles, then you would put in the stub axles, again, titanium stub axles with tie nuts, bolt everything back together, and you're ready to roll. The Reid Performance transmission mount is now in, and everything worked out great. Oftentimes, as most of you know with aftermarket, things don't go so well. However, with this particular part, everything worked out amazingly well, and it uses the factory bolt holes, which, as you know, I'm a huge fan of. The mount attaches to the transmission, comes back to a rubber mount that is housed within a billet plate that has gussets for strength, and of course uses the factory bolt holes. It's all incorporated well, and the piece is very nice. Now once it's done in a situation like this, it's just a whole lot of fun. But many of you that have seen my other Murci video hear me complain a bit about the traction control being so intrusive. This car has no stability control, so they really rely on the traction control so you don't ball it up. Amazingly enough, I would have thought the situation would have become much worse just converting to rear-wheel drive, but in actuality it doesn't. It typically will give you just enough play where you won't get into a ton of trouble unless you're going just completely bonkers. And it'll come in and catch you and hopefully save you from a whole lot of expense and heartache. But if you really want to get crazy, just shut it off. But even for me, a word of caution, things can get a little bit out of hand. But out of hand, insanity, fun, there's all a fine line there, right? Now, after all that work, the most important part is the weight savings. So let's take a look at the scales and see how everything went. So there you have it. That's how I did it. Now mine's rear-wheel drive. Of course, the big question is, do I plan on putting it back? Absolutely not. I'm having too much fun. But, I mean, if I ever wanted to, it's not that difficult of a job. I'm sure with all of your skill sets you could pull it off, you'd be good to go. Now there you can see right there, I tried to lean into it and the traction control did come on. It was really intrusive. The problem was that there was a vehicle in the other lane, so I wanted to make sure I stayed in my lane and my steering angle was tight, which actually made it come in much harder. If those of you want to get a little bit wild and leave the traction control on, less steering angle helps out a whole bunch. It'll actually allow you to pitch out the rear end and then it'll come in to hopefully save you. Another big advantage to the rear-wheel drive is clutch life. If that's a concern of yours, then this definitely will help. I don't know about you guys, but last time my clutch was done, some of you probably saw the video, it was around $15,000. So getting potentially double the clutch life, plus or minus, is very advantageous. Now another really cool thing is you could just be cruising along here and punch it and the rear tires just break loose, just like that. With the weight savings and the decrease in the loss in power through the drivetrain, you can definitely feel the difference in power, such as it's fast. I mean, here we go around the corner, just kind of hit it, and well, you can feel it really come loose. There's a traction control. It just smooths. It's just a load of fun, period. Alright, now we want to get down to sane speed levels, obviously. There tends to be a lot of law enforcement around here, and I'm not feeling super lucky today. Man, that sound is just off the charts. And for those of you that are wondering if the Murci shifts just as hard in rear-wheel drive, I can confirm that that is a yes. Now, let's talk about the dyno. I've actually wanted to put the Murci on the dyno for a long time, but as many of you will remember, my dyno is broken, so I had to tune the 7, so I figured, why not fix it? Well, now that it's fixed, the opportunity is there to put this on. What I'm looking for essentially is a real good baseline. These type of cars for me, I typically just want to do an exhaust, maybe an intake, and not mess with them too much. I really like reliability and avoiding all those miscellaneous problems that just seem to pop up with these cars when you do a lot of modifications. But all this really has is I've got the SV air filters, which is not a huge modification, and then I went with the Lamborghini Newport Beach exhaust, which removed the secondary cats. Pretty much that's all that's been done to it, so it'll be interesting to see how it does. It's a good time to dyno because I don't know if most of you saw, I just changed the spark plugs and the coils because I had a misfire. So now that that's all done, we can put it on and see what happens. If you're gonna dyno your Murci or other exotic supercar, hypercar, I definitely would recommend going to a place that's used to doing it, because even for me, it is not easy getting these cars tied down properly without screwing something up. And if you're on the ground, like I am, it makes life even more difficult. Now, of course, there are models that go up in the air, and that's a lot easier to tie down on. Might be advantageous to go that way. Just in my specific case, because of the shop and I need to be able to move cars back and forth, it just wasn't an option, so I went in ground. But if you go to somebody who's in ground, a couple things I'll point out that may help you. These are my race ramps. They don't cost a whole lot, and boy, they are just a lifesaver because they're easy on the clutch going up, and they give you enough room to get your arm under there to put that axle strap, if you choose to do it that way, around the subframe to tie down. Now, without the race ramps, I couldn't do it. And also it creates a clearance problem on the ground between where the hook from the strap mounts to the axle strap. It will hit the under tray much worse. I still have to shim it with rags, but unless you're the size of Drew with very small arms and can get under there, then this creates a major problem. If you have tow hooks underneath your car, like the 7 does, it makes life a lot easier to tie down. However, for most of us that have other cars that are even lower, this presents a problem. What I usually use are axle straps, so it's a good idea to have a whole bunch around. And if you get to the dyno shop that doesn't have it, that's not a good thing. I would be very cautious about that, because when they tie down, it's very easy to damage plastic panels, under trays, which on these type of cars are mega expensive. So what I recommend is using a ton of rags. Believe it or not, yes, shop rags work really well as shims to make sure you don't damage any of that expensive carbon fiber or under tray panels. I've got the front all tied down. It wasn't too bad, but for being so low, no tow hooks. But on the Murci at least, there's a subframe under there where the control arms mount to. You can get an axle strap around there and pull from each side. I will caution you, there's very little clearance with the under trays though, so it's always good to shim something in there to protect them. In the back, much of the same story. There is a subframe there that you can grab. I chose to use 2 different axle straps per side and get some outward pull. I am gonna have to center up the car, and then this way I'm not putting all the load in one centralized place because the frame in the back is much smaller than the frame in the front. Now that the Murci is all tied down, the first thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and fire it up, let it warm up. I've got to let it run on the rollers, then center the car back up and tighten it down. But even after that, because the dyno is sitting in my shop and the car is sitting here cold, I have to drive it on the rollers to heat up all the oils to temp. And hopefully you wouldn't have to worry about that if you're driving to the dyno. one thing that does pique my interest, I have seen some people that have done exhaust manifolds, headers, that claim to make a ton of power. Unfortunately, it does interest me. I don't know, maybe in the future here I'll consider even building my own manifolds, but we'll have to see. But at least for now, it's a good idea to get a baseline. Well, there you have it. The Murci made it off the dyno in one piece, and essentially that's the most important part to me. That and a clean run. All of you could hear no misfires. Everything seems to be running at 100%, which is my favorite place to be. Now, as far as power, we can take a look here at the dyno sheet. You can see right here that we're putting out around 580 horsepower to the ground. Now, those of you that are gearheads will take the calculation, I'm sure, of 15% loss to the driveline. That's pretty substantial. I mean, that's really good. I'm impressed with what it did. I mean, does it really matter to me? No, not really. All I care about is the driving experience and how good this thing looks. So as far as that, we've covered that by changing the rear-wheel drive. For me, that's a vote yes. I don't know, depends on what your comfort level is. So other than that, I think we've covered just about everything. And what is it time for now? I think all of you know. It's time for me to go enjoy the rest of my day in the Murci and for you to have a great weekend. See you next time.